Birds are everywhere we look, and as humans have urbanized the Earth, birds have had to adapt and coexist alongside us, one of the principal adaptations supporting this being flight. Flight provides a spatial freedom for birds to overcome climate shifts, habitat fragmentation, and threats, which is primarily attributed to their defining trait, feathers. Feathers are not only for flight, however. Birds use feathers for insulation, waterproofing, protection, and display, allowing for diversification into many different habitats and niches, hence why birds occupy almost every biome on Earth. Feathers predate birds, however, by tens of millions of years. So how did feathers emerge, evolve, and become so versatile? To understand this, we're going to delve into developmental findings and fossil evidence to see how they appeared over time. Before the emergence of true feathers, the developmental groundwork to build these structures were already present to produce scales in reptilian. Modern developmental biology shows how scales are formed from individual placodes. These are where localized thickening of the skin's epidermis has occurred. This involves interactions between signaling molecules, where activators such as sonic hedgehog and FGF must exceed inhibitors like BMP for the induction and development at each placode site. Interestingly, feathers share the same developmental origin as scales, with this fundamental molecular toolkit being co-opted for feather production. Feathers are theorized to have evolved initially through the elongation of these placode buds, where evolutionary selection pressures encouraged the lengthening of these scales. They likely utilize protein structures most closely related to those used in beaks, claws, and asymmetrical scales, where distal development at the tip of the growing bud becomes tapered with posterior polarization. Following this elongation, invagination of the epidermis occurs. This means the outer layer surrounding the bud bends inwards. The genetic basis for determining whether a region produces a scale or a feather is through Hox genes, which map the identity of body regions, and retinoic acid modulates each local morphological response. We can see fossil evidence of where this early filament stage, feather development, may be linked to evolution. In some dinosaur species, these hair-like protofeathers, or dinofuzz, were sustained in adult individuals. This is seen in small theropods like Sinosauropteryx, where protofeathers likely supported insulation or display functions. The complexity increases when we observe differentiation of the follicle in development. The barbs, which are individual ridges in the follicle, are produced through controlled cell death, which is induced by BMP signals, while primarily sonic hedgehog and another molecule called noggin promote the survival of cells forming the individual barbs, essentially protecting them from BMP. As feathers develop, they become more differentiated, and more branches or barbules are produced, and this provides more specificity for different types of feathers, with some being more structurally organized than others. One element involved in this is the rachis, which is a rigid structural shaft where the barbs protrude from. The evolutionary timeline of the development of the rachis is debated, but data points to the branches developing prior to the addition of the rachis, which is in line with bird development, where chicks often have looser, fluffier feathers, while adults possess more firm, tightly knit barbs.
As feathers diversify developmentally, we see their evolutionary counterparts branching across the dinosaur lineage, and some of the clearest insights into how they've changed come from fossils that preserve not only bones, but soft tissue impressions of feathers themselves. One of the earliest and most iconic examples is Archaeopteryx, dating back to the late Jurassic period. Its feathers show a striking innovation, asymmetrical veins where one side feather is narrower than the other. This is a hallmark of aerodynamic performance and suggests that by this stage, feathers were already capable of supporting gliding or limited powered flight. But Archaeopteryx was not the true first feathered dinosaur. It's simply one point in an evolutionary landscape, where different lineages experimented with feathers in different ways. For example, Corroborates and Proto-Archaeopteryx, which lived millions of years after the earliest filamentous dinosaurs, had fully formed veined feathers on their arms and tails, yet they were flightless. This makes it clear that feathers did not originate for flight. And the aforementioned Sinosauropteryx, appearing almost 10 million years after Archaeopteryx, had only a short fuzz intended most likely for warmth. These are not examples of de-evolution or developmental mistakes, but a phenomenon called mosaic evolution. These same structures, under varying selection, will adapt differently, and developmental innovations like the Barbrachys architecture were co-opted for flight later on. Other fossils, such as Eutyrannus, a large tyrannosaurid covered in thick filamentous feathers, demonstrates that thermoregulation capability, likely helping to maintain stable body temperature in cooler climates. Meanwhile, pigment-containing melanosomes in earlier feathered dinosaurs like Anchiornis show patterns suitable for display, camouflage, or communication, indicating that visual signaling was an early driver of feather evolution. Even hypotheses such as protection from solar radiation have been proposed for densely feathered species. Today, the same fundamental developmental processes give rise to the extraordinary diversity of modern feathers, from down feathers that are plumulaceous, small, fluffy and for insulation, trapping air to keep birds warm, to pennaceous flight feathers, which unlike down do have a central rachis and interlocking veins, resulting in a long, stiff and asymmetrical structure for lift, propulsion and control in the air. very similar to that of the Archaeopteryx's tail feathers. Feathers enabled birds to radiate across nearly every habitat on Earth, and their evolutionary journey illustrates how even small developmental shifts can produce one of the most successful and versatile structures in the history of life.